I've highlighted in red the bits that are wrong. But the Daily Mirror take the biscuit. They got 3 things wrong in the same sentence, right? 1 in 1,005 on ibuprofen will suffer heart failure over the following year. So firstly, they got the number wrong, they got the disease wrong, and they got the time frame wrong, which is a pretty epic win by the Daily Mirror, right? So media coverage is extremely disproportionate. Now, patients crave reassurances and certainty, and real medicine, I'm afraid, can't always provide that, even in diagnostics. So, right? That's kind of the first thing we're going to have to get our heads around, that we have a problem with figures. We lack numeracy, and we lack statistical knowledge, you know. So we'll talk a little about this. So journalism is the other big media killer, right? And it was a phrase that was christened by this guy, Rasim Zakir, and he said, you get copy coming out in wires and reporters churn it out. They process stuff, they add the odd local quote, and instead of news being, you know, proactive, it becomes reactive. They get a central wire story sent them. A classic example of that is what I just picked up on the train today. Metro Herald, did I ever read that?
No.
They have no reporters working for them. Every story that you see in Metro Herald comes from a wire, central agency, and it's not verified, it's not fact-checked, and it's a serious problem. We're going to see why in a few minutes, right? So, a harbinger of the end of news journalism, we know it. The coroner's verdict can be nothing other than suicide. That was the British Journalism Review back in 2001. So, right. How dare you suggest my papers rely solely on journalism? We also run outright fabrications, right-wing rants, moral outrage, tits, and absolutely voicemails. I would love if Rupert Murdoch said that. If I got that story on wire, I could probably even get away with printing it. And this is probably a SOPA violation, this image, but you know, we'll let it slide. Okay, so this is one. And it doesn't just affect, I mean, I'm having to go with the red tops. But here's one that got, this is actually, I started my blog based on this. This is how irritated I got. It sounds funny to think. This is the Irish Times last year. The Zodiac is now 13 strong as, you know, signed in. Can't pronounce it. Right. This is. Did you guys remember this happening last year?
Yeah.
I took my pen, my Mont Blanc, and I wrote furious letters to the Irish Times that never saw the light of publication. But basically, what actually happened was an astronomer over in Minnesota was contacted by a local rag who said, "Hey, tell us stuff about astronomy." Or astrology, and he said, well, it's all rubbish because with axial tilt of the world, you know, you don't even have, at the moment, we have 13 constellations in view. Now, he was pointing out a fact that's been known since 130 BC. Like, the Romans discovered this star sign, okay? And what did the Minnesota Star do? They went, astronomer discovers new star sign. And that one little innocuous incident got repeated by every mainstream media, because it went straight to the wire. And people picked it up and they went, oh, this story. So, you know, it does happen everywhere as well. Here's another one. 2,000 bugs taking a ride in every train compartment. Do you guys remember this a few years ago? This is 2010 in the Daily Mail. And it was, even in a taxi there'll be 20 cockroaches around you. It's disgusting. It makes you react. It's visceral. But you actually realise it quotes a guy from Rent-A-Kill giving these figures. And if you follow this back to Wire, it was a story that came from Rent-A-Kill. And they just ran it in every major paper over there. And here's one from just a few weeks ago. Woman with 2 vaginas offered an alien to make more movie. Now, one of my little games when I'm really bored is Trace the Wire. From where did this come from? Now, those of you that spend too long on the internet looking at sites that you maybe shouldn't be looking at, realise that the word vivid entertainment comes up in here. Vivid entertainment makes some of the cheesiest pornos that you can get going. But they bought headlines all around the world. If you Google 2 vaginas, I've done it for medical research. You Google 2 vaginas, that's your first hit. And it's not even that uncommon a condition. That's hilarious. I had a woman ask me in Cork, do you think 2 vaginas is funny? And she was deadpan about it. I did not know how to respond to it at all. A little bit. But I was afraid maybe she was a sufferer of this, you know. So I kind of went, well, it's not funny per se, but the coverage of it is funny. So she accepted that. I got away with not being told. Right? So all these stories are told trite, and they're just repeated from other wire sources. This is journalism, right? What really worries me, though, is 80% of news content in the quality British papers, The Guardian, The Observer, is that it's from wire sources. So they did a study a few years ago, how much original reporting is actually in those papers? 12%. That's the best of the best paper, have 12% original reporting, and in the tabloids, forget about it. You know, you might as well have a story book. Right? Here's a quote. Remember, some of you follow the Leveson Inquiry at the moment?
Yeah.
I just like seeing Murdoch humiliated. It's fantastic for me, you know? But scores, if not, this is a quote, right? scores of the hundreds of front-page stories were written by PR men. They would think up a headline of the story, and the Sun and the News of the World would run it, word for word. Some of them were complete fiction. Meanwhile, proper stories by proper journalists are buried deep inside the paper. That was a comment on Rebecca Brooks' editorship of the Murdoch tabloids. What I kind of find interesting is I've looked through the Sun a few times. I've never found a quality story buried in it, so, you know. Third little trick is false balance. This is when you put the Flintstones on par with, you know, actual evolutionary theory and try to say they're equally valid and you have to represent both sides. The nerds in the audience will recognise that. Yeah, you know, we'll crack this not in a while, this evolution just being a theory thing, right? So this is my pro tips for false balance, right? This is to make disagreement within the scientific community seem greater than it actually is. And the steps involved in doing it, I should trademark these. I think I've worked out the 4 steps to make anything, right? First, you cherry pick some experts. You go out and you find a guy, doesn't have to be an expert in the field. John Bradley here is a PhD in biochemistry. If I'm running a medical paper, I can say Dr. John Bradley. It doesn't have to be his field. If I can get him to say something and quote it, that's my expert. In America, you have your politicians who somehow become experts, God knows how. Then you exaggerate uncertainties or gaps in the science. No, valid academic questions, you make them, oh, theory is invalid because there's a question about that. And all science has gaps in it. That's the thing, it's a constantly evolving. You can do it, it's so easy to do. Then you attack or smear individual scientists. Anyone with an opposing viewpoint, make out they have an agenda, they do something, connect them some way. Then insist the media report both sides of the story. And this is the kicker, because they always do, right? So, this is Rick. He probably didn't say this, but in my head he said this. Sure, science will tell you homosexuality is natural. We know a guy with an MD who says gayness is caused by lack of moral virtue and a fondness for lycra. The experts cannot agree. You must report both sides. And unfortunately, the media seem to bend over backwards to oblige people like this guy. Has anyone Googled Santorum? No. Okay, let's not get into that. Right, so let's just take a few. I love this. That you can't read the small text there, sadly, but it says intelligent design because retarded idea wasn't as catchy a name, which I quite like that. So let's talk about the 4 steps involved in this, right? The scientific consensus, natural selection, evolution. You all know this, I'm preaching to the choir here a little bit. Proponents of intelligent design reject evolution and they cite pseudo-scientific or biblical sources, because we all know the Bible is entirely consistent, fantastic text for stuff. And they have their cherry-picked experts. They have Michael Beha, who once upon a time was a respected academic and now lives in a Mormon community with a giant beard, waiting for the new flood to come. So, you know, you've got nuts and all that. Exaggerate technical points. They'll give out about the accuracy of radio dating, even though no biologist uses radio dating for that kind of stuff, doesn't matter. They'll find gaps in the fossil record. We're lucky to have a fossil record at all, and evolution doesn't even rely on the fossil record things. They will smear evolutionists as misguided or social Darwinists, which, of course, you guys know the difference between social Darwinism and Darwinism. They're not actually related apart from the name. One of them is a philosophy, it's a bit nuts, and one of them is a scientific theory. I'll let you pick which is which. They also have a great argument. Show me your intermediates. Show me your crocoducks. See, hang on a second. You believe something that is descended, the ancestor of both the duck and the crocodile, you think it should look like a crossbreed between a duck and a crocodile. Yes, they do. That's actually the attacks they've used, and it's fantastic to see these guys talk, because they get paid to talk stuff. So what's their